Okay, this is like take 67 of this portion of the video. If you have forgotten your high school or college freshman biology classes, let's go over Mendelian inheritance for a second. All of the genes we're talking about today are going to be inherited the same way the genes on Mendel's peas were inherited. So if you don't remember Mendel's peas, there are lots of YouTube videos to go more in depth in it. I'm going to do a real quick run over of it for you now. Using snakes, this can be extrapolated to most living things though. Every snake has 2 copies of a gene. They don't have to be the same, like wearing 2 different shoes. Now in the scenarios we're talking about today, a gene is either recessive or dominant. A dominant gene covers a recessive gene. So having a dominant gene makes the recessive gene not show. Quick scenario, parent 1 has brown hair. Brown hair, dominant. Parent 2 has blonde hair. Blonde hair, recessive. Quick note, they're not simply dominant and recessive in real life. We're just using this as an example. Now, parent 1 with brown hair could have 2 dominant genes for brown, brown, or because dominant covers recessive, they could have 1 dominant brown and 1 recessive blonde. Parent 2 has both recessive blondes because blonde is showing, so they can't have the dominant cover gene, right? All right, so if they have offspring, parent 1, if they have both dominant genes, will only pass on dominant genes, right? They pass on 1 out of the 2 genes. They'll only pass on either a dominant or a dominant. Parent 2 has both recessive, so they will only pass on recessive or recessive. So all of the offspring will be dominant recessive. Dominant brown, recessive blonde, dominant covers recessive, brown hair. So 100% of their offspring will have brown hair. Now, if parent 1 that has brown hair has 1 dominant brown gene and 1 blonde recessive gene, it's a different story. They pass on 1 gene to their offspring, remember? So they will either pass on dominant brown or recessive blonde. Keep this picture in your head because I only have 2 hands, not 4. Parent 2, both recessive blonde. So if you remember the picture of my hands a second ago, their offspring will either be, right, dominant brown, recessive blonde, brown hair because dominant covers recessive, or recessive blonde, and blonde. So they'll be 50% brown hair, 50% blonde hair. Now, technically speaking, that's the chance that every embryo has, is a 50% chance of having brown hair or blonde hair. And in a big enough sample, if you're talking about a big enough sample of offspring, 50% of those offspring should have brown hair and 50% should have blonde hair. But the smaller your sample size gets, if you only have 2 snakes, say, we're talking about snakes, I guess, with hair now. If you only have 2, they could both be brown hair or they could both be blonde hair because it's a coin toss for each embryo. It's not a coin toss for the whole group. So if your snake has a small litter and they don't show a recessive gene that you were hoping they had, it doesn't mean that they don't have it. It just means that it didn't show up because the population was too small. That's something to keep in mind. But, so I hope you understand now a little bit about how the recessive and dominant genes work when they're passed on. I've put the Punnett square calculator I use to calculate my own outcomes of my breeding matches in the description box below. They haven't sponsored me or anything. I don't even know who runs the website, but it's the one that I use the most, and I think it's probably the best. You can also use the ball python genetics calculator on, I don't know, ballpythons.net or whatever it is. I wouldn't suggest it just because some of the genes in ball pythons are not the same as the genes with the same name in sand boas. Like paradox albino does not work the same way in ball pythons as it does in Kenyan sand boas. But if you know that, then you can prepare for that and you can use that calculator instead. Okay, if you have questions about it, post it below. I'll try to answer them if I can. I do have a bachelor's degree in biology, but I'm not a geneticist or anything, so I may not be able to answer all of your questions. I also only work with sand boas, so if you have questions about other snakes or other animals, I'm probably not the person to answer those.